This is McLeod Insights, where we feature conversations with longtime transportation industry veterans who are now team members at McLeod Software. Our goal is to support and empower our customers by helping them learn about proven ideas and best practices that will have a positive impact on how they run their companies. Let's dive in.
Thanks for watching our first McLeod Insights podcast, Attacking Operational Cost, and for tuning in for episode 2. I'm Clint with McLeod Software, and today I have Jody, Farley, and Randal Sanchez joining me to discuss the topics that we covered during episode 1. Jody, would you introduce yourself?
I'm a customer advocate with McLeod. I am one of those road warriors traveling a good majority of the time to visit our customers, to develop our relationships, and work on making our customers more successful with their implementation of McLeod software. I've been doing this about the last 7 years. I also do some consulting with our customers, teaching them how to use the profitability analysis and pricing within the system. Those are 2 areas that I've focused on pretty heavily over the last 7 years. Prior to that, I was the general manager of a trucking fleet of about 120 trucks here in Minnesota.
Randal, would you tell us your background?
Sure, Clint. You've heard that story about once you're in trucking, you don't get out of it. I was lucky enough to be born into the industry, and I'm still here. But I was in a family business up until the time I joined the Marine Corps. When I left the Marine Corps, went right back into the trucking industry. And the previous 11 years before coming to McLeod, I was actually a customer of McLeod's at a refrigerated carrier in Central Florida. Left there and came to work for McLeod in May of 2014, so approaching 10 years here working at McLeod. And I'm currently a solutions architect. I work with our ECS folks and helping prospective and current customers find the right products to fit their needs and to help them become better trucking companies.
Great. Well, if you guys are ready, let's just jump right in. As we saw with the ATRI cost study, one of the improvements that needs to get a whole lot better in the trucking industry is dwell time. Clearly, detention remains a big problem, and it's on the top 10 list of most carriers each year. What are we able to do to help carriers on this subject, and how are most of our customers realizing results from fighting detention?
Well, Clint, I'll jump right in here on that one. One of the big things I think that we've done to help our customers with detention is really automating the process, taking those very difficult rules that are out there that the shippers want you to meet so that you can actually bill and collect detention. We try to take that process and put it into rules that are standard for each customer, so that without having to have someone on the front lines constantly hitting those different marks to meet those different rule demands, we bake that right in the system, so as the trucks and carriers arrive and depart, we're calculating all of that information so it's not forgotten, and that we hit those metrics that are out there that those customers want us to hit. And then, of course, we can automate the billing of that process and the settling to make sure those folks get taken care of. The other side of what we can do, how our carriers are benefiting in the fight of this, I think it's just a collection of data. Clint, I know for the last 6 months or so, a partner of mine, and we've been involved in a study on detention, industry study, not necessarily a McLeod product study, but an industry study. And I think what happens is, as you're moving through this and collecting this data, it becomes really helpful to understand how detention is actually impacting your company. As you move more towards managing detention versus reacting to detention, you can start collecting that data and really understanding what type of impact that has on you as a carrier.
And why do you think larger carriers do a better job of collecting detention today than, say, mid-size or smaller carriers?
I think it's some larger carriers do a good job of it, is what it is, and I think it's really those that have recognized the impact that it is having, the actual percentage of loads that are being impacted by detention. Don't want to release too much of our study information, but there are some carriers out there that it's not. They've realized that it's not something that just happens. It is something that is part of their daily life. It is something that they're going to. It's going to impact their business, and they've understood that and begin to measure it. And as you all know, if you can't improve it unless you measure it.
That's right.
I would also like to add in about the small carriers. They just don't have the time or the resources sometimes to process the detention, to keep track of it. They're trying to track it, but then to turn around and bill or to pay their drivers for that. If they don't have a system to do that, it's a lot of work. So automating it is something that would benefit small carriers, big carriers alike. But if you don't have it automated, it's really hard to do.
Absolutely.
Great point, Jody. Thank you for that. So another big cost issue is equipment utilization, and we know that has a direct bearing on operating margin. How can we help carriers improve their equipment utilization today?
Well, Clint, I go back to my days as a carrier, and one of the things that we used to focus on was something we called lane discipline and lane density. And utilization is all about that, making sure that when a truck goes one direction, there's a load to bring it another direction, not necessarily right back, but there's a load close by. And I think it's a lot of the tools inside McLeod that are already part of base product, some of the lane analysis tools showing inbound orders and outbound orders and the margins and the dollars and per miles. And the costs associated with all of that are right inside the product, and it just puts it right in front of you so you can understand exactly what that truck is doing, or how many trucks they made it into Arizona and how many trucks were outbound. What are those per mile revenues and costs associated with that? And understanding all of that is huge when we start talking about utilization, knowing the right market to put your truck into.
Right. And on top of that, the lane analysis is watching your deadhead, right? Keeping track of your deadhead, how far you're going, and building on that to look at round trips. For us coming out of Minnesota, going to Florida, right, that was a great move, but coming back straight out of Florida to Minnesota, we could use lane analysis in many different forms to see what we should be doing instead to capitalize on keeping that rate per mile up and the deadhead down. There's also tools, that you can look at to see which trucks are actually moving, which trailers you're using, how many are sitting idle, and how many tractors are actually under a load. I know I've talked to a lot of owners who will want to set goals high, 90%, 95% of our trucks should be moving at any one day. But then when we start looking at those real numbers, it's more like 80% for an average fleet I see. Sometimes depending on the fleet, it's really surprising to see what those numbers are compared to what the owners think those numbers are. So it's good to set those goals and then look at them. They say to inspect what you expect. If you're not looking at your data and you're just taking guesses, that leaves a lot up for discussion.
Jay, that's a great point on when you talk about data, and I think that's just another big thing when we start talking about velocity, Clint. Data really helps us, and the amount of data, the insight that we give you to that data, the deadhead, as you mentioned, Jody, and just the network, the visibility into your network to make sure that when that truck gets unloaded, you've got a reduced amount of deadhead to that next piece of freight. And this goes, the velocity question even goes back to the original question about detention. If we're measuring detention and we know how it's impacting us, we know maybe we want to avoid that receiver or that shipper in that area that's going to cost us an X amount of dwell time that we don't need to. We can keep that truck moving on a better selection of freight inside our network.
So just as a follow-up question, how would the two of you or one of you describe velocity if you were to define it for a customer? Because I noticed when I worked with a lot of transportation companies, I didn't hear them talk a lot about velocity. So could one of you kind of give a good definition of velocity for the audience?
I can do that. So velocity is related to speed at which your freight moves, right? So you're looking at your miles and you're looking at how long it takes to move that freight, and you're doing calculations on it. My velocity in my trucking company may not be anywhere close to the same velocity of another trucking company that has a different freight mix. So you can't really say, your truck should be moving at 35 miles per hour velocity, right? That's taking into account how long the move is, if there's break time or resets that need to happen in the middle of a load, how long it takes to get loaded and unloaded. That's all going to look different for everybody. So you can't set and say, what a good velocity number is overall. But if you look at your own velocity within your own company, or even within one of your divisions, a certain group of lanes even, you should have a good idea of how fast those can move, and then be looking for those exceptions, right? Who's not moving at the speed that they need to be moving, either due to that particular customer or the lane, or is it one driver? Do you have a driver that likes to take his time or go through the house, and you're not noticing that if you're not looking at velocity, you're not watching that. So once you start knowing what those numbers are, it's easy to catch those exceptions.
Good points. So helping our carriers see the truth about their lanes and specific customers is pretty crucial to not just equipment utilization, but to overall operating ratio as well, correct?
Yeah, definitely. Looking at those lanes, like we mentioned a little bit ago, knowing where you're coming, where you're going, and building some density into that. Even, one of the things that I've talked about that I've heard of in the past is looking at your lanes and then looking at your driver pool. Do those drivers fit into your lanes, or are you expecting to get your drivers home in a whole different lane, in a whole different part of the country, and it's not happening as often as they would like, or costs more, because you're not looking at those lanes and making sure that you're running in the exact places you need to be running to keep your drivers happy.
Clint, that's a really good point about that understanding your lanes and the profitability and the OR. There's a lot of folks out there, and I was one of those folks back in my trucking days, but we run into people all the time who have choice accounts. They're just great. Everybody loves the work, and it's amazing. But when you actually examine the data and you put it through some of the tools that McLeod offers, you might realize that the very best customer you think you have may not actually be your best customer. You may have a great relationship over the years, but at the rates you're honoring today, those may need to change, but at the rates you're honoring today and the network that you built around them, it may actually be hurting you. So having the tools available to analyze that may give you an opportunity to go back and lean on that relationship a little bit and say, hey, we need to do something different with these rates. No bad freight, just bad pricing.
Another thing the study noted was no big progress for the truckload carriers in reducing deadhead. Let's talk about how we can help address minimizing deadhead with better planning.
Well, I think that is something that is just like a lot of things that are just throughout the product, right? I mean, we not only have deadhead reporting, we have alerts that can alert on excessive deadhead at the time of assignment or dispatch. We have tools right in the product as you're pre-planning a driver that are able to show you the deadhead that's involved, a feasibility tool that will not only look at several other factors, but put your per mileage calculation out there as a revenue for that order, but then also say, hey, here's the deadhead you're considering, here's the impact it's going to have on revenue. So we have an awful lot of tools out there that are dedicated to reducing that deadhead, and it's just throughout the product.
Again, I would say too, to look at those exceptions, right? There's a couple of great ways to view that deadhead, and you don't have to pay attention to a good majority of it, but then when you start looking at those exceptions, where's our deadhead high? Set a goal for yourself, and work on getting those numbers down on a regular basis, not just on a lane by lane basis, but also on a division basis for a particular customer. Slice and dice your data and look at that, and it becomes easy to notice those things that are out of line.
Yeah, the interesting thing about deadhead is when we talk to people about deadhead, sometimes the answers we get seem to be more like their guesses or estimates than they are actual numbers in some cases. So that was something I always observed and found pretty interesting. There was a new metric in the ATRI study for the first time that I'd never noticed before, and it was the ratio of drivers to non-driving employees. 3 drivers to 1 non-driver was what the study found, and that is below what we know for our customers as an average. McLeod customers tend to accomplish a lot more with a much smaller back office. What are all the factors that contribute to that?
I think it's really all about automation. It truly is. It's all about collecting of our documents and the automation involved in making that back office a much smaller staff, the need for much smaller staff. We've gone from folks having to review every single document that comes in or every single order into an exception-based process where really our logics process, our robotic process automation kind of takes over the heavy lift and just leaves behind the exceptions that need to be looked at or considered by human eyes. So we're able to take on more freight, bring in, calculate more settlements, bill more loads with less people. When you're only worried about the 10% or so, or even less than 10% that need to actually be reviewed by human eyes.
Great point.
Something even outside the system that I've talked with a lot of customers about is having them take a look at their business processes.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to keep hearing, well, that's the way we've always done it, right? Where can you cut out time from your processes now that you have access to something better? Or just because you're taking the time to look at it, maybe somebody new is in that role, but they were taught a certain way. So we talk a lot about business processes and how to be more efficient, even just with your day-to-day jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Great. We know automation plays a big role in reducing home office cost, improving time to bill, time to settle, collections. What are all the elements of that cycle that we help carriers with?
Well, I think it really starts, if you think about it, Clint, as kind of a life of a load, right? We get that load out to the drivers. The drivers will go out and completing that load, and immediately they're able to upload a document from the dock of delivery and collect a signature. Well, if they're using our app, that image, that BOL that we're typically waiting on, is immediately ingested into the product and available right there to be used, and usually picked up by one of our robotic process automation tools and then moved along through the process. It'll get into our billing environment. In that billing environment, it'll look at the customer and say, what other documents do I need to build this customer, and make sure that we get this out and all the paperwork associated with it. Well, the tools, those robotic process automation tools, can actually go out and say, hey, listen, I'm missing this document, and reach out to that carrier, that driver, and say, please send this document in so we can finish that process, and then continue to bill that once all the documents are collected, and then do the same process for settlement. So really speeding up the entire process through automation.
There's also the FlowLogix tool that I was just listening to somebody talk about recently that would help you, if you could put a reason behind anything and put some logic behind it. Manual processes can be turned into automated processes. Mm-hmm. Taking a reference number that came in with a shipper and it needs to go to the consignee, right? Even as simple a process as that can all be automated, as long as you have the definitions behind of why you can automate it.
Mm-hmm.
That's great information, Jody. Thank you, Randal, as well. Driver turnover is another real cost for most carriers. The ATRI study didn't dive really deeply into the cause of turnover or the specific cost, but we know those are pretty big. What are the things that we can help carriers with that impact the cost of driver turnover?
Well, I think like a lot of tools in Loadmaster and Power Broker, this is something that's really just baked throughout the product. There's all kinds of things out there that speak to driver retention. Although they seem like everyday tools that people use, they really do help with driver retention. Something as simple as our event management or our vacation request. We call those events in the system, but these are just simple time off requests. I don't know how many people I've seen before using McLeod, they'd write those down on a sticky pad, right? And they'd put that vacation request down on their calendar, and there it would sit. And a week before the driver's vacation comes up, they're the only one that knows it. Planner puts on them a load headed to the West Coast, and now that vacation becomes an emergency and not a priority. Something as simple as putting that in the system and alerting those planners and dispatchers that there is an upcoming time off request. Please don't dispatch around it, or stop the dispatch in some cases, are huge for drivers. Just someone actually understanding that they've got a time off request coming up. Those things are huge. making sure the driver has the right dispatch. Here at the users conference, we're getting ready to release a new product, Loadmaster's Load Match. And it really talks about making sure that you're reading the right load or giving the right load offerings to that driver, making sure that they're not only something that they would like to do or meets their fleet pattern, but also it's feasible, right? They're able to do it. It meets their logbook, and all the things that you would usually do by hand are now fed to you, so you're able to see the right thing. So I think the idea of retention is just baked throughout the product.
One thing the cost study does not speak to that really does have an impact on operating ratio for carriers is not really the cost side, but the pricing side. While that includes spot pricing, more important to most of our customers is pricing for their contract freight. How do we help carriers every day to keep from leaving money on the table?
Oh, there's so many options in the system for that. It starts with knowing what the rates should be according to what the market says that they are right now. With the market insight, where we have the McLeod customer data available for lane data, just knowing that and watching those rates historically over time, especially with the volatile market we've had over the last couple of years. People might think that they know what the rate for a particular lane should be, but then when we start talking about it, again, there's a lot of surprise as to how something has moved, and they didn't even realize how the rates had moved over the last couple of weeks, for instance, when we were talking. So knowing that between the market insight data, impact, the product that gives us a further analysis into our rates is a really great place to start. And then putting all of your data into one place. So the pricing module, something that I help consult with for our customers, allows you to create a bid library where instead of having all of your bids, you talk about contract freight from your customers, instead of having your bids sit out on somebody's computer or on a server somewhere and you got to open up each spreadsheet and look at them separately, you could bring them all into one location. So within Loadmaster or Power Broker, you bring them all into one location in the pricing module. And then you can do some great analysis, right? It speeds up your whole process. You're not having to go look for distance, right? You're not doing all these Google searches trying to find a distance between 2 points for every lane that you want to bid. So you got volume of, thousands of lanes that you need to bid for a customer, and you need to get that out there in, a couple weeks time. It saves all that upfront, just manual labor, putsy work, figuring out rates that you were charging in the past or what you've historically moved that lane for. So you put all that together in one place, you're going to be more efficient and you're going to be more accurate, and it will help you win bids a lot more reliably. I have a too.
That's a really great point, and I'll tell you what, our data scientists here at McLeod have really helped our carriers up their game, right? I mean, they really have. Making that information available not only at the pricing level, but even to the front line, so that opportunity, that spot opportunity comes up in a market that you're usually not used to. Being able to reach out and get that data in real time and see what the market's doing today is really important for you to make sure that you're doing the right. It's not just some tribal knowledge or something I think I should do. Well, it really lets you get all of the money that you should be getting for the rate on that truck. I think it's extremely important. They've done a really great job, and there's some great tools that are coming out, some predictive pricing tools that are on the way that I think our folks in data science have just done an amazing job to make sure that our folks are getting all they should be getting.
Well,
also knowing your costs and pulling that into the equation takes that from knowing what the revenue per mile might be on a lane to knowing if that revenue per mile is good for your business or not. Diving deep into those costs, not just on a general basis of here's our income statement and we know what our overall cost per mile is, but you can get down to what's the cost for that lane? Mm-hmm. What's the cost for that one customer, for this particular group of freight that we're moving? Because then you're armed with not only knowing if that's a great rate, but knowing if it's a great rate for your company based on what your costs in that lane is.
Well, thank you so much for that feedback. I think one of my takeaways from this is the fact that there are a lot of different things that we need to manage in transportation. We need to manage our detention time. We need to manage our cost very closely, our operating ratios. We need to know what our better lanes are, and we need to know how to price pretty well. And perception's not always reality. So if you don't have the tools that can actually tell you what reality is, you may be making some pretty bad decisions. So thank you for all this great information, this great insight. I hope we're able to do this again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.